Thank you everyone for joining for day 2 of the PRCA Change for Good conference. And today's session, we are going to be talking about the role of intersectionality and collaboration in building an inclusive industry. Our keynote speaker is Barbara Phillips, founding chair of the Race and Ethnicity Equity Board at the PRCA. She's also a PRCA board member, and she's a skilled, experienced strategic communicator and the founder of Brownstone Communications. She has been a long-standing racial justice activist, a public speaker, and a trainer, and she sits on the board of a number of organizations. What may be very interesting to everyone is that she is also very involved with the Black Curriculum Advisory Board, and of course, she's a member of the PRCA. And before we get started, I'd just like to say that we'd like this, to be inclusive, for us to be respectful of everybody's views. This is open, so if you need to chat, if you have some questions, please drop it in the chat. And we will open up for questions once Barbara finishes her keynote speech. And we look forward to having your engagement and your views and thoughts. So please feel free to continuously share your experiences. And if you'd like to tweet, please tweet using the hashtag PRCA Change for Good conference. And we'd also like to, just before we start, thank APCO very much for supporting us to enable us to make this open to everyone and also to pay our speakers, which I think is fundamental to show that we respect all our speakers and their time and how much effort they're making. So thank you, Barbara. Without much ado, I'll give the space to the person who knows about what she's going to be speaking about today.
Thank you so much, Sudha, and congratulations on creating this conference. It's amazing in such a short space of time, so thank you for inviting me. So welcome everybody. As Sudha illustriously introduced me, I am chair of Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. We are a standing committee within the PRCA, which means we're not going anywhere. And we've been around for about 12 months, and we focus on race. We focus on race within the PR and communications industry and broader in society, race. So today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, as leaders, making equity and inclusion over and above diversity. Let's focus a little bit today on equity and inclusion, the center of your corporate strategy, and then within that, making race the center of your equity and inclusion strategy. So that we are going to be talking about race, and it is going to get uncomfortable for some people. So to that, I just want to sort of set the tone of what I'm going to talk about today and the tone in the room, if you like. It's not about blame, but it is 100% about accountability. So I'd like to start off with a quote. It's from someone called Penny Brownlee, and she has a book called Dance with Me in the Heart, and it's about parental and children's relationships, that quite difficult relationship as it can be. And she says, you are not responsible for the programming you picked up in the download years of your childhood. Okay, we all agree, but you are 100% responsible for installing the upgrades. Now, I think we'd all agreed PR and comms needs an upgrade, especially in the sphere of racism. And that's what we're going to continue to talk about today. So we are 12 months into the outpouring of Black, Asian, and ethnically diverse PR and communications professionals, myself included, reliving the impact of long-standing systemic, structural, institutional, and interpersonal racism. Through microaggressions, through blatant naked racism at work. And I think you just need to ask Saka, ask Rashford, and ask Sancho how that feels. Racism trumps everything. But let me reframe that a little bit. Let's be realistic. It's the PR and comms industries have finally decided to listen to Black and Asian and non-white professionals who over the last 12 months listen to us for over the last 12 months. We've been singing the racism song for a very, very long time. This isn't a new release, it's more of a classic. So by now, you may or may not have seen excerpts from Baroness McGregor-Smith's review, Race in the Workplace. That was first published back in 2017. It was brimming with research, data, and clear government recommendations. Perhaps you've noted that as of 2021, none of the recommendations have been implemented. Or perhaps you successfully ignored what should be the central focus of your corporate sustainability strategy, irrespective of sector, but especially within the PR and communications industry. So whatever your leadership makeup currently, in-house or agency, it's widely accepted and reported from the PRCA census in 2020 as one source that in the UK, it is unlikely, your leadership makeup is unlikely to include any person who is not white and male. Therefore, your brand, reputation, and the shape of your success strategies will be determined by this narrow group. And it is a narrow group. So back in 2020, Selene Henry, well-known comedian and author and activist, as part of his research for his book, Access All Areas, which I highly recommend, he rang the Office of National Statistics to confirm something he'd been thinking about for a very, very long time. They told him that only 29.5% of the United Kingdom's population is made up of white, heterosexual, able-bodied men. Yet they absolutely dominate corporate UK and most certainly our industry. This is not sustainable. And further, putting a powerful minority, because if you look like me, you're actually in a global majority. So putting a powerful minority at the center actually blocks meaningful inclusivity. So there is, I believe, an immediate need for you to focus on the recommendations mentioned in the McGregor-Smith review. Again, they were widely reported, they're still available. And in addition to many other pieces of research from McKinsey to the United Nations independent human rights experts who reported on race in the UK consistently between 2019 and as recently as this April 2021, both qualitative and quantitative, formal and anecdotal. This data just screams that race is specific and specifically anti-racism should take center stage in your route to future success. So race is actually present in every diversity, sustainability, ESG strategy, and is the most, I found, feared, dreaded, and therefore avoided aspect. Conversations about the damage racism causes in corporate environments are difficult and uncomfortable enough, but become excruciating when you arrive at its center. And that is what Black and to extent Asian people have had to and continue to experience within our industry and other spheres and other professions. Again, ask Saka, ask Rashford, and ask Sancho. So yes, I am talking about just focusing on, for a moment, just a moment, on Black people. Not BAME, absolutely not BAME. The term itself serves no purpose apart from othering and lumping together masses of hugely different cultures and ethnicities, and the majority of whom are other than white. By signing up to be an anti-racist organization, you need to center the Black experience, and here is why. Again, before I go into this, just remember our opening quote: there's no blame, there's no shame, but you are accountable. So this is why I think you should center on the Black experience. Black people and those identifying as Black are the gateway to a more inclusive, sustainable, and consequently successful culture. We, along with additional non-white identifying groups, are paid less, and you can check out how that works through the REEB Ethnicity Pay Gap Guide. It's available freely. Download it, make it work for you, start looking at ethnicity pay gaps. So we are paid less. We experience the highest overall levels of discrimination, documented through thousands of pages of anecdotal evidence that can be sector and profession specific. Again, we talk about, our footballers whose names I've mentioned, but also remember during the absolute pinnacle of COVID, even though we're not over it yet, Black and Asian people and non-white Asian NHS key workers were fighting COVID on one hand and racism on the other hand. So it appears everywhere. Back to our industry, we are currently experiencing the highest level of unemployment within the industry. We are more often given an additional round in the interview process, just to be sure, one more extra hoop, one more extra jump, just to be sure you're right. We often have to go through that. We endure specific types of racism, such as microaggressions, and one specifically aimed at, if you look like me and you're of my gender, it's called misogynoir, and it's specifically reserved for Black women. And we are more likely to be overlooked for promotion. So this is not a pretty picture. We are in 2021 and it's not a pretty picture. Yet, people who are identified as non-white, we strive to be successful and productive colleagues and leaders. So if your organization can attract, retain, and promote meaningful numbers of Black people in relation to your employee population, it sends a signal that your culture may be safe for all diverse groups. Black and Asian people don't have the luxury of masking our race. So we have to learn to cope with whatever reaction our Blackness brings. It's part of the, sadly, it's par for the course. A common reaction in the past, because this is not new, as I've said, and we've been, at least at REEB, we've been talking about it solidly for 12 months. A common reaction that I found from PR and communications leaders when I suggest centering Black people is, we believe in diversity for everyone. And what about? And clearly I'm not going to finish that sentence. 2020 was a peak year for whataboutery, and we are now halfway through 2021. Intersectionality, on the other hand, is critical. And a little later, as Sudha mentioned, I'll be joined by some of my peers in the industry to explore this in the context of race and why it's so important that REEB and EIAC, our host today, work closely together. So as I mentioned only last week at the PRCA National Conference, you can't genuinely be on the path to being a diverse and inclusive organization and exclude the racism in your organization and in the industry, reserved, because it seems to be, especially for Black and Asian people, specifically Black people, reserved for Black professionals. So I'd like you to think of it this way, open your mind, step back, go with me. Imagine all of the 9 protected D&I characteristics, they're all at a meeting, seated round the D&I. So this time I'm talking about diversity because that's the industry that's huge. So they're all seated round the diversity and inclusion, the D&I table, or currently they're on a video call because that's where we are. Sometimes in these meetings, many of the 9 characteristics are included in the conversations, sometimes only one. That tends to be gender. But they all got the Zoom invite, so they are all present. All 9 characteristics, well, all 8 characteristics in actual fact. This goes on for years and years through multiple meetings into the thousands. Then one day, there's a knock at the conference door or someone requests entry into the video call. It's 2020 D&I. 2019 D&I is the meeting host, so allows 2020 D&I to join the meeting. Stay with me. 20 D&I says, I brought race with me. Can you please let race in? They've been trying to join this meeting for ages, literally. So 2019 D&I agrees. I don't see how you can have a D&I meeting without race being included. Come on in, race. And race joins the meeting. And so I think that describes how 2020 became the year of reckoning for racial justice and racial equity. And we finally began to have an open and eye-opening conversation about race in the PR and communications industry. So your equity and inclusion journey, because let's focus on equity, to create a culture change and a psychologically safe space for all groups where you dismantle policies and sanction behaviors that allow discrimination and racism will be a pointless trek into the wilderness if you can't bring yourself to include race and make the Black experience the center. Racism trumps everything. Now, at this point, some of you may already be uncomfortable and shifting in your seat, and I just want to add an extra dollop of discomfort for you. And I need to ask those of you in positions of influence and power and decision-making to ask yourself why it is, after 12 solid months of exposure to all of the bad behaviors, the language, the practices, do you still have a board that is majority white, probably middle class, and probably male, when the UK's talent pool is clearly multicultural and fully reflects the makeup of people who live here and contribute fully to its success? And before you utter the what about, this time about the pipeline, I'm here to bust that myth. There is no talent pipeline issue. I repeat, there is no talent pipeline issue, but there is a deep-seated reluctance within PR and comms organizations to recruit senior level professionals who are not white. Support them and put them on the path to the C-suite. Deep reluctance. So the question really for this group of leaders and influential people is why? I could make an educated guess, but that question is not for me. So you might be asking yourself, well, I mean, we've got a multicultural group. No one's been speaking about race in my organization. No one's really put their hand up and say, look, I'm not comfortable, so we must be fine. I'm sure there's lots of organizations, agencies are thinking, well, we've got some Black and Asian and we've got a good mix and it's all fine. I'm not hearing anything, but let me just maybe point you in a slightly different direction. There's a whole list of reasons why people of color, and especially Black and Asian people, are not talking to you about what's going on in your organization. So I'm just going to list just a few. First of all, they don't want to appear a victim. I mean, it's traumatic enough having to live it. And we all know that as soon as Black people or Asians or any diverse group start talking about their experiences, you know, the professional gaslighters come up and pretend they don't exist. So, and they create this whole victim narrative when really we're talking about our lived experience. So we don't want to appear a victim. We're not saying anything. We don't want to be confrontational. I mean, let's take me, for example. I am Black. I am a woman. Ergo, I am angry. That's the narrative. So I don't want to be viewed as confrontational. So we're not saying anything. We don't want to be ridiculed. I mean, it's bad enough living this trauma and you know, living through traumatic experiences of work isn't a great thing, but when you hear it ridiculed as banter, nobody wants to experience that. No one wants to add to what it's like, so we don't say anything. And if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you've gone through 2 or 3 or 4 extra rounds to get that job, just because, you don't want to rock the boat. If I've just arrived after my 15 rounds to get to that into that role, when I've just arrived, I'm not going to rock the boat. So I'm not going to say anything and you're not hearing from me. I also, and these are all your Black and Asian colleagues, but also, I don't want to become the voice of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a movement. It's lots of people. It's white allies. It's Asian allies. It's everybody who supports anti-racism. I don't want to be that voice. If you are really interested in the lives, the lived experience and anti-racism as a leader or even as a colleague, educate yourself. There's masses of information out there that you can catch. So, you know, you don't come to me. I don't want to be the voice. I don't want to be the library. So rather than be the library, I won't say anything. Also, there's some other areas where you're not hearing from some of your colleagues. Maybe I'm too junior, because there is a predisponence in the PR and comms industry to, yes, you know, we do recruit Black and Asian and non-white executives, but they always seem to be at a lower level. They're always at the entry point. Hear lots of stories. They're great roles, but they're always at entry level. So if I've just joined as an entry level, I lack all sorts of influence. So I'm not going to be talking to you about my experience. And by the other extreme, if I've been there a few years and I'm slowly, steadily working my way through the organization, but I've already been passed over for promotion, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to say anything. You're not going to hear from me. And kind of a culmination of all of this is if I fought my way in, done the extra rounds, but I'm a little bit junior and I know the culture, is not going to flex for me. This is one of the issues we have with PR and comms, is those cultures don't flex to include everybody. They're not inclusive. It's not just having the black or brown face, it's flexing the culture. So that means that people who look like me have to kind of bend and contort themselves to squeeze into the existing culture. And when we found a position, uncomfortable as it may be, we just want to fit in. So you're not going to hear from me and I'm not going to say anything. And finally, I say a culmination of all of this is it's just so exhausting to talk about this. It is. Don't underestimate the emotional price you pay for just talking a little bit about your lived experience, because you have to relive it, you've had to work through it, and you've had to get by it to keep on going so your performance doesn't dip, because that's something else I'll come to a little bit later. So if you're one of those organizations that is inclusive in terms of racial diversity, but you're not hearing from your people, happy to go through this list at a later point, but there'll be reasons why you're not hearing from them. These are some of the reasons why. So in conclusion then, anti-racism should permeate all aspects of your operations, how you deliver your service and how you interact with your clients. If you're an anti-racist organization, it should be visible in who leads, who is influential in decision-making, which suppliers you use, how you recruit, and how easy it is to move through the organization irrespective of one's background. We should be able to see that. It should be tangible. And when you act, because hopefully by now you understand that acting is a business imperative, make equity and inclusion the center of your corporate strategy, and make race the center of your equity and inclusion strategy. Racism trumps everything. And here are just a couple of basics to follow up. If you're still standing still, and even though 12 months have gone by and there's been copious amounts written, conferences like these, speeches, videos, and you still haven't been moved to start, couple of pointers to push the boat out for you. So what you should be after, what you should be trying to create, and this is going back into more broader diversity and more broad inclusion, is a psychologically safe environment, but especially for Black and any non-white, any ethnically identifying employees. It's for them to succeed unimpeded. Take down those policies, take down those areas of organization that stop people who are not white to progressing in your organization. Take a look. If you look close enough, you will see them. So that's what you should be aiming for. Psychologically safe. Let your Black and Asian people succeed on merit, unimpeded. Ethnicity pay gap reporting. This is one that you really, really should start today, even if you have only one Asian or Black or brown person in your organization. Please use our methodology in our ethnicity pay gap report and our guide, and please check that they are on a similar salary to their white peers. It sounds really, really complicated, but actually the basis of it is actually quite simple. So that's something you can do today. Check that all your Black and Asian employees and everyone who's ethnically diverse is actually on the right salary. There's not a big pay gap, because sadly that does exist. That's not a myth, it does exist. And also don't be shamed into have to reporting your ethnicity pay gap, because as early as next year, you know, it may become mandatory. There's lots of MPs pushing for it to become mandatory. Better you start now than be ashamed into, we're all about reputation. How will it look to your clients if you're shamed into having to report it because you refused in the 2 years that you've run up that you've had to have a look at ethnicity pay gap. So as I say, if you need a guide, go to the REEB pages, it's free, make it work for you. We also want to look at visible representation of Black and ethnic employees in succession planning, same as they are with white, their white colleagues. You can't really seriously, as I said before, say, yes, we're going on board with inclusion, we really want this to happen, we don't want to be the same makeup as we are in 5 years' time, if there's nobody on the succession planning, there's no one on the pathline. If no one's getting the mentoring, no one's going on the special leadership courses, no one's getting access to the big client accounts, then it's performative. So make sure, look at your succession pipeline, see who's on there. If it's not diverse, you will never be diverse, you will not be inclusive. And finally, as I said earlier, you should really be looking at dismantling organization-specific policies and practices that are proven to enable discrimination, especially around race. They're there, hiding in plain sight. And this must include what you do around recruitment, grievance procedures, performance reviews, and a little bugbear of mine is PIPs. I've yet to find one Black or Asian, but mainly Black people who haven't been put on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. As soon as you start talking about race, which I didn't do very often, misogyny, Islamophobia, homophobia, bullying, harassment, as soon as you speak out, boom, you're on a PIP, because it's used to weaponize to quieten you. Another reason why people don't speak out. So look at those, look at who's on PIPs, look at why they're put on PIPs, and it'll be quite eye-opening for you. These are just a couple of things you can do to start off. So to end my time with you now, I have a great quote, which I like to use, and it's by Ijeoma Alowu, and she is a Nigerian-American writer, and she writes about race. And she says, the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. Let me repeat that. The beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be an anti-racist. It's not as difficult as you think. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. We all have elements of prejudice, but including, fight it in yourself. Maybe fight it within yourself first. Why are you stopping promotions? Why are you stopping, recruitment of more Black and ethnically diverse? Why is that? Fight it within yourself, and it's the only way forward. And thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Barbara. That was brilliant. Thank you for a really inspiring and very truthful and hard-hitting presentation. Any questions? You could raise your hand, or just unmute yourself. Oh, Karen wants the name of the author and the reports from the chat. I have one question for you, Barbara. You mentioned you started REEB last year, and you've been very action-oriented. Your approach has been very action-oriented. There's nothing vague about what REEB is trying to achieve. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what we're going to do, and this is when we're going to achieve it. You're very focused on that. So not from a point of view of REEB and what you're doing, but generally from the industry point of view, have you seen progress in the last year?
I think we have to, there's baby steps and there's baby steps. And I think we're at the baby steps. I mean, I had lots of conversations. I've spoken to a few leaders, and I think a lot of leaders are still having that aha moment. They're still realizing, oh, we're actually quite a racist organization. Oh, I didn't realize not having anybody of any color in any kind of senior position maybe isn't, a great idea for sustainability. So I'd say we're at the very, 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 very beginning. I mean, lots of people, lots of agencies have done a big recruitment drive. They did a knee-jerk recruitment drive, but they've all been at quite junior levels. And I had a really in-depth, interesting conversation with the specialist agencies about talent, senior talent, and how that some of the skill sets you're looking for may not necessarily be in PR. They may be in another sector, but you can bring them across. Don't let that stop you from employing senior Black and Asian people because they haven't had this stellar PR path, because one, it's too difficult. But you can get senior people to come at a director level in another sector who'll have all the skill sets you need. So I'd say the answer to that is not an awful lot, but there's a lot more will, put it that way. Maybe not a lot of action, but a lot more will.
There's a question from Mary Beth. What are some of the things practitioners can do to combat the PIP issue when they try to speak about equity and concerns in organizations? Are human HR professionals becoming more educated about combating retaliatory PIP action leveled against team members? Is HR an ally or a culprit?
Sadly, I've had to say that in my experience, and from a lot of the experience, HR, sorry if you're on HR, has been a culprit. They've been an enabler of some really, really bad decisions. And they have known, this is the instances I've had of experience, HR have known exactly what the issues are, but have chosen just to side with, obviously the organisation, obviously they're worried about their role and they're worried about their ambitions, but they haven't been helpful at all. So that's thank you for that question, Mary Beth, because yes, what can you do? I think awareness is. I think we need to let leaders know that this is going on in HR, because a lot of the time leaders will just ignore HR because it's too difficult, it's transactional, and it's not very inspiring to them. So leaders, be more involved in what's happening in your HR, be more involved what's happening in your recruitment. If you're wondering why you're only seeing white faces, get involved in the recruitment process and you'll find out why. So I think leaders need to be more involved. And HR practitioners, there's someone called Shireen Daniels, she's ex-HR. I suggest you check her out on LinkedIn. She's amazing. She'll give you all the technical expertise you need, because I'm not an HR person, but she is. So I think there's just lessons to be learned for the HR industry. And again, I always put everything down to a choice. What do you choose? Which side are you going to be on? Because it is kind of like a side. Which side? Are you going to do what's right ethically? Or are you just going to stick to your guns and feather your nest? I think that's where we are.
True. That's true. Brilliant. Barbara, no other questions. Any other questions? I can't see any hands up at this point.
I think someone had asked for resources. I'm happy to send resources after. There was, I use an author at the beginning, which I can send on. There was an author at the end who I can send on. And the McGregor, Smith-McGregor report came out in 2017. It's Baroness Ruby. It was a government sanctioned report. I'm not going to mention the report that was done recently because I think that was just a gaslighting exercise. So I refer to this one. That's available. I can put that then. Yes, and there's. I'm sure you may have read of the United Nations had to get involved in the state of racism in the UK, especially, and poverty as well. That's widely available. But yes, I can make a list and send it on.
Yeah, brilliant. Should we move to the next, to the panel discussion now?
Okay, great. So I see Anne-Marie, and do I see?
Yeah, Emmanuel is there.
Emmanuel, fantastic. So everybody, we are going to thank, nicely lined up. So these are my colleagues. These are my amazing colleagues on REEB, including Sudha. So congratulations again, Sudha, on this event. It's amazing. So Sudha, Anne-Marie, and Emmanuel, we all sit on REEB. And when we launched REEB, we decided we're going to focus on race for the reasons I've just detailed in my talk. But then we also understand intersectionality. We also understand there's a broader, lens here, there's a broader picture, which is why we're so delighted to work with Sudha on EIAH. That's wrong. EIAC. Beg your pardon. Yeah, we're delighted to work with it because it meshes together. So we're going to have a conversation about our experiences. But first of all, let me let Anne-Marie and Emmanuel, because I'm sure you've met Sudha, introduce themselves first, and then we'll start this discussion. So off you go, Anne-Marie.
Oh, Lizzie, how do I introduce myself? So my name's Anne-Marie, and for the purposes of this, I, as you've heard, a founder board member of REEB, which we founded almost a year ago, actually. We're kind of coming up to the anniversary. I'm also on the board of the IEB, a member of the CIPR, and also a member of the PRCA. So I'm an equal opportunities association person. For my day job, I am now an interim, but I did have a relatively long and successful career in comms at major financial services. And I think we'll probably kind of talk a little bit about my story a bit later, but I'm a recent entry into kind of talking more openly about this. I think previously I've kind of, someone came up to me and said that they had never seen anyone that looked like me in comms, which kind of floored me a little bit. So from that day, I decided that I needed to do a little bit more. So that's me, and looking forward to talking to you a bit later.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. And Emmanuel?
Thank you, Barbara. Lovely to meet everyone. There's a few familiar names I can see here, so it's just amazing to be on this platform. As you know, my name is Emmanuel. I've been in comms for about 10 to 11 years now. I'm currently UK PR manager of Mercer, the asset management and HR consultancy firm. I'm also on the board of REEB. I'm also on the board of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industries Black Business Association. And I'm also a governor at South Key College as well. So I do a lot of stuff outside of work, focusing on diversity and inclusion. And I'm really passionate about this topic. So it's a pleasure to be here and hear, the discussion and contribute as well.
Right, thank you for that. So, between Anne-Marie and myself and Sudha, you see, we cover a lot of ground in boards, we cover a lot of ground in associations. We're doing everything we can, everything within our power, everything within our sphere of influence to push this argument forward, to push this whole section forward in terms of racism and equity and inclusion. But, we need help and we need support, and it's great to have these kinds of conferences. So I'm going to start, Anne-Marie, or do you want us to go first, Anne-Marie? We decided to bridge the whole area, because I've spoken exclusively, obviously, and quite directly about racism, but there is an intersection to it, because we're not all just one person. We're not all just one thing. We have many dimensions to us. And if you're going to be inclusive, you have to look at the whole dimension, not just, okay, tick the gender box, great. Tick the race box, great. That's not really it. So I've asked Anne-Marie and Emmanuel, and obviously Sudha as well, to give us some stories about their experiences where the racism was actually, sometimes the discrimination was above the racism just made it work. But I'll stop talking and let Anne-Marie start.
Okay, so I've had a slightly different experience to kind of maybe a lot of my peers, insofar as I haven't really had some of the really terrible experiences that I've kind of read about recently when people are talking about their lived experiences. So as I said previously, I've had a relatively long and successful career when I worked at a major financial services firm and kind of rose to quite high up in the organization, I guess. But on reflection, I'm thinking actually maybe it was some of those microaggressions that have held me back. And so my own story is I'm, relatively well experienced. My performance was always top performer. So, I always got top bonuses, top assessments. And I couldn't quite figure out when I was trying to move from middle to senior management, which was quite a big deal in those days. I couldn't understand why I wasn't progressing, and it was really annoying me. And I could see mostly men and sometimes women actually kind of getting roles without much effort. So maybe they were mediocre performers, or some of their behaviors weren't necessarily right. And the more annoyed I was getting, like the more kind of, I guess, eaten up I was getting inside. And fortunately, I had a really good mentor. She's a really good friend of mine now, but she's a very senior person, came from GE, and she was new to the firm. And she said, Anne-Marie, let me sit and talk to you about PIEs. So I sometimes talk about this when I'm kind of presenting, but PIEs stands for Performance, Image, Executive Sponsorship. And what she said to me is that actually performance, like when you get to a certain level, it really is just table stakes. People expect you to be able to perform. But what is really important is image and executive sponsorship. And so my own image, I'm going to be quite open with you now, was that I was sometimes aggressive, that I kind of said what I thought. And actually on reflection, some of those things are really quite micro-aggressive, because people would look at me and kind of come up with a certain image of me. And so, my executive sponsor, Paulette, I name her, she really helped me to kind of work on things around kind of my image. And actually I did get the promotion, and kind of my career has flown. But actually what that has meant is that I have got to where I've got by not being myself, but by blending and adjusting my own maybe natural style that is it accepted in others. And people coming up the ladder now, and it's kind of like trying to climb a ladder, isn't it, with broken rungs, isn't it, if you're a woman and also kind of a Black woman as I am. And so one of the things I'm really quite keen to address is that people should be able to be themselves at work. Doesn't matter what they are, and that they should be given kind of equality of opportunity. And that's what's really driven kind of my interest in this area at the moment. So kind of maybe looking back on my story, it hasn't been as easy a ride as maybe I have sometimes thought it has been, because actually I've kind of blended, and I don't think people should have to blend to kind of get in where they are.
Excellent, and I support you, and I certainly appreciate that. And like you, I too, I didn't have executive sponsorship, and I think I kind of stopped because I'm always being quite outspoken, and I've decided, a number of years ago, I'm just going to be myself, and there is a price to pay. But back to the point in terms of inclusion, we're talking about inclusive cultures. We believe that your culture should be fluid. Your culture should be able to bend and mold, and it should be able to encompass everyone. I mentioned it earlier in my speech that you have to, Black people sometimes, and anyone who's not white essentially, have to contort themselves and twist themselves, and the beautiful way that Anne-Marie said, blend, to fit in, and then just hang on in that culture, irrespective of the damage it may be doing. We talk about mental health issues, we're talking about nano well-being. A lot of that comes from having to not be yourself, not have your own hair, not speak the way you'd like to, not express the way that express yourself the way you'd like to, not be able to bring your cultural background into the conversation, not be able to bring that to work. That's all damaging from a mental well-being aspect. So the point being, if you're talking about inclusive cultures and you're interested in building an inclusive culture, bear that in mind. Anne-Marie's a woman.
It is, yeah. It's so interesting, because there are some kind of mental gymnastics I have to do when I'm kind of going into any situation, even at my level. So things like, if I'm going to working in big corporates, often you go to events, I make a conscious decision not to wear black and white. So I like the colors black and white, but I don't wear them, because the amount of times I've been mistaken for someone that's actually serving is like unreal, really. And I also made the kind of conscious decision that, when I'm in meetings, I'm not the first person to pick up the teapot and offer people a drink, because obviously I'm with women, and then, kind of people kind of just assume that that's what I'm there for. So there are kind of some mental gymnastics that I kind of have to do, which kind of, it is what it is, really. But it's quite good for people to be a little bit aware of that, actually. So, yeah.
Great point. Do you want to come in, Suja or Emmanuel?
Yeah, I can. Oh, sorry, Seda, did you want to go?
No, you go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I just wanted to share some of my experiences. I think for me, it's similar to Anne-Marie, but I think it's just the total opposite. Being a Black man in the PR industry, for me, was something that I saw straight away as soon as I came into the comms industry in 2011, 2012. And luckily, I came in through the Taylor Bennett Foundation, which was a scheme that was set up to get people from my background into the comms industry. And without the Taylor Bennett Foundation, I probably wouldn't have known about PR or communications at all. So it's really important to have organizations and support organizations such as the Taylor Bennett Foundation, because they're able to reach communities that a lot of these agencies and in-house teams are not able to reach. So I think that was something that I really struggled with when I came into the industry, because I looked up and I couldn't see anyone that looked like myself, let alone, CEO, not even a manager level. So for me, it was really difficult. And luckily, I found a mentor outside of my organization who kind of mentored me into being more confident and being my authentic self. And I also realized, when I was working in an agency, when a lot of my counterparts were going into pitches, a lot of them were going in there with connections. Some of their dads had worked in corporate organizations before. And they were bringing in new business to the company, whereas someone like myself, my dad was a bus driver. My dad had no corporate connections whatsoever. So, I was already thinking to myself, I'm already on the back foot here, because a lot of my, peers who were white, they had the connections into these big corporate blue chip companies, whereas I had no one. So I was already kind of doubting my ability on the agency side, because I was thinking to myself, how can I ever get to that account director level if I can't even bring in business to the company? So I was always kind of second guessing myself. And even when I was, asked to go to pitches, I would go into the pitch. I'm the only Black guy there. When I'm about to speak, I'm thinking, okay, do I need to speak in a posh accent, or should I bring my...
You're mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I just said, when I went to pitches, I was trying to kind of change my personality to fit in the people that were around the room, and I just wasn't comfortable. So, after that, I realized that, you know what, I need to just be open about the issues that I'm facing. So I just kind of just went on a whole campaign by myself, even during my agency days. And I just started to PR Week talking about the issues that I was facing. As you can, if you look me up on Google, you would see some interviews from 2013, 2014, where I'm talking about this issue. And I was about, what, 23, 24 years old. So I've always been passionate about this topic. But as Barbara said, you know, it's been some time, and I feel like we're still at the baby step stage, because when you look at the recruitment process, you know, why are people like myself, why are there not more people like myself in the comms industry? So, I mean, young Black men at PR manager level or director of communications level, you know, even if you just go on LinkedIn and you just type in PR manager, you probably have to get to the 15th page before you find a Black person. So for me, that's a real issue, because I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm mentoring some of these younger people to come into the industry, but when they're looking up, they're not seeing anyone that they can aspire to be like. So that's where I have a problem, because I'm saying to myself, okay, there's not enough of me to go around. So I think that's where we need to really try to crack that, you know, that problem, and get more, you know, Black men into the comms industry. And, you know, it's amazing to just join this call and see there are other Black men and Black women in the industry. So I just feel like we just need to come together, and even people who are not Black, you know, who are passionate about this topic. You know, you can make some real change within your organization just by, you know, connecting with organizations such as REEB, the PRCA, CIPR. I think, you know, there's a lot that we can do.
Wow.
Thank you so much for that, Emmanuel. And yeah, I mean, in terms of just, you know, joining the loops back again. So we've spoken about race and gender, and obviously Emmanuel has made a great point about race, but also about socioeconomic background, about barriers to getting to the PR and comms industry, where back in the days when I started 100 years ago, it was, you know, something that was, it was called fluffies. They were called fluffies, and fluffies were basically very well off, rich young ladies who'd gone to a beautiful private school, maybe they'd gone to a finishing school, and they were dumped into PR to give them something to do. And that's how PR had a really awful reputation at that time. That's how old I am. So I was around in those times. So luckily that's moved off, but I think there's still a remnant of who do you know, which schools, socioeconomic background, you know, what can you bring to the table, how you speak, where do you live in a council house, do you live in a tower block, do you live in your own house, do you have a country estate? That's all playing into it, and that's not inclusive. Absolutely.
Yeah, someone asked me like what school I went to, and it did take me, I mean, I know the codes now. I've worked in kind of investment banking, so I kind of know the codes there. But when someone says, what school do you go to? They don't mean what school do you go to, but it's just such a really interesting question.
Exactly. Yeah. And when, I mean, I would refuse to answer questions like, are you the first in your generation to go to university? I answer, put none of your business. It's really none of your business, because it's not about what happened to my parents or my sisters or brothers. You know, you're employing me. So great. Sudha, let's hear.
Yeah, so amazing. Anne-Marie and Emmanuel have shared their experiences. So when I started out on working in diversity, that was gender diversity, that was 20 years ago, I was working on it as somebody else's problem. But I came back to it 5 years back when I was returning to India after a long stint in India, where I had caring responsibilities, and I tried getting a job and coming back, and it didn't quite work. You know, I applied and applied and applied, and it didn't quite work. And then I came back and started applying again, and I got a job. But you know, the challenge of being a brown person, a woman, and of a certain age. I was 48 at that time, and I think all of my intersectionalities clashed to actually create this huge wall in front of me. I joined an agency, and then after a year and a half, I stepped back because, you know, I was the only person, I think, who looked like me. In the whole agency, there were a couple of, maybe 2 people in an agency, which was a huge agency, maybe 2 people of color. And but they didn't look at me as someone who had led an agency. I was the executive president of Ogilvy PR. I headed 500 people, another agency, and I had done lots of work. But because I am this person, I think I hit a wall, because I knew a lot of people at the same time as I came back, who were white and who came back into agency life as leaders. and they didn't face a wall at all. And it hit me really hard, and I started talking about it in the past 1 or 2 years, because I want to create as much awareness about this as possible, that people need to plan, we need to think about our networks, we need to speak up about these issues, and we need to make sure that agency leaders understand. And also, when you talk about inclusion and we talk about equity, there are, Barbara spoke about separating, Black and race from other things. I think it's very important to do that, because the historical and legacy disadvantages that some people have are different to others. It doesn't minimize the others, but it means that you need to pay attention to on the issue of race. And for agencies, I'd like to say that the recruitment is not the panacea to this issue of equity. The people who are recruiting, who do they look like? They're not going to be empathetic to the people they want to hire if you want a workforce that looks, different to you. And that's a big challenge. That change is not happening. And often, the responsibility for equity and inclusion goes to HR or that one diversity person. And that's not a thing. Pooja Sachdev, who's written a book about this, and I interviewed her in the past, and she said, HR are like poachers turned gamekeepers when they start looking after equity and inclusion issues. So we need to be very, very thoughtful in our, what we do and what organizations are doing. But I'd like to say that I'm glad to be with Barbara and Anne-Marie and Emmanuel to talk about these issues, because I am an older person now in the industry, and I constantly, have felt challenged by these issues until I've taken charge of like Barbara, decided to take ownership of my journey. And that has been a bit freeing, but it was very, very, it was a bit, angst ridden for some time, until I could come to this place where I could recognize that, okay, this is not going to work for me, and I could keep hitting my head against the wall.
I totally, being a veteran like yourself in the industry, 25 plus years, I totally sympathize and agree. And, and going back to this, creating inclusive cultures and what inclusivity looked like, not letting it be narrow, not just saying it's loading the first 5 Black people you can find and shoving them in your company. That's not it. And I just want to discuss a tiny bugbear I have, and that is the focus on gender. It's almost like an obsession with gender, gender, gender. If we do gender, we sort of diversity. Gender is diversity, diversity is gender. Absolutely not, because you have to find within gender, and even within, let's take feminism, for instance, there's a lot of racism within feminism. There's a lot of race, and there's lots of the gender initiatives generally benefit white women, and they leave out everyone else. So don't think you've ticked the box by gender. Let's go for, the LGBTQ plus community. Also, there's Black Pride started in 2006 because there was racism within that community. It is, when I say racism trumps everything, it really does. So don't think, okay, yep, we've got some people from that community, ticks that box, we've done our diversity, we're inclusive. Not really. If we had to have a separate Black Pride procession, and then gender initiatives only really benefit white women, there's more to look at here. So what we're saying is, generally, when you're looking at, take a broader lens, when you're looking at your inclusive culture, don't think you've done gender, you've done that community, you've ticked the box, you've got able-bodied people, you've got people who are not able-bodied, you've ticked the box. Remember, within that, the ableism, and remember within that community, there's racism. So, it's not me just trumping on, literally racism permeates every aspect. So when you're really looking at that work, really think hard about it.
Yeah, I just want to make a point interjection about an example about, what they did in San Francisco Bay Area technology companies doing this thing around diversity. And of course, gender is the first piece where, so representation of white women increased when they looked at gender diversity, but representation of Black women and Asian women did not increase, because, they had the double jeopardy of being women and being Black or brown. So racism trumps that. And like you said, Barbara, in your keynote, that you have to be very conscious about how intersectionality is going to just weigh down people. And, gender is not the panacea. Gender without intersectionality, gender without considering, women of color, what their age is, women of color and disability, women of color and, their social mobility and where they come from. I think all of these considerations need to be taken into account, and not just leave it like the pale gender kind of thing that it is currently. We have to be very clear about that.
Yeah, one of my observations, and it's interesting, maybe, I don't know whether it's because I've got more involved, so paying a little bit more attention, or whether it's just a sign of the times, as Prince would say. But one of the things that I have observed is that, there are organisations and people within those organisations that really want to do something. So they're really keen on addressing it, but they don't know what to do. So, they get involved in things like Taylor Bennett, for example. So they're getting people like through the door. And then many recruiters say to me, we don't know where to kind of find people from. So you give them some tips. But once people are through the door, it becomes more of a revolving door, and retention is really an issue. And, kind of what are the sorts of things that we could do to kind of help retention across all kind of the, all kind of elements of kind of diversity and inclusion. And I think it's the don't know what to do that sometimes is a little bit of a kind of barrier for some organisations. And I think with this, we're kind of trying to learn together, aren't we? I read somewhere that it will take, the current trajectory, it's going to take about 95 years to get parity. I mean, I'll be well gone by then, I'll be enjoying my mojitos in the sky, I guess. But, what sort of things can we do to kind of help speed it up? And I think, don't be afraid to kind of try things that don't necessarily work, because you can, as in marketing, you kind of test and learn, don't you? But I think sometimes it's a little bit in the difficult box, which is why we're kind of paralyzed by analysis, as it were. We're looking at all the data, what can we do, what works, what doesn't work, and subsequently then we don't really do anything. But
and that's a great point, Anne-Marie. I think that was collectively as a board, that was ideas. The first move we made as a REEB board was to do the ethnicity pay gap, because that is one area which is quite tangible, which you really absolutely, if you're not sure, if it's complex, if it's mind-boggling, you're thinking, oh, there's so many moving parts here, you can absolutely focus on making sure that there isn't a pay gap, and if there's a pay gap, you close it. And I've spoken to some agencies who don't have any people of color, and they said to me, well, what do we do with some of this? A lot of what you're espousing, Barbara, is for people who, agencies who are inclusive. So we started talking about recruitment. We started talking about the recruitment process and the pipeline. But I said, it's advice I gave to them. I said to them, even if there's not one single Black or brown person in your organization, still do the work, because you're not going to get any Black and brown people into your organization if they look, they see it's all white, and you have policies that are blocking them anyway. I said, it's double. So I said, even if you want to attract and retain the right talent, and you want to go to the broad multicultural talent pool that's available, put in the work. Make sure that there's no policies in place. So if you did employ a Black or Asian person, they would be on a different pay scale. Make sure there is nothing, that's going to block them. They should be on the succession planning. Just prepare the way, if you like, even if there aren't any Black, and then you'll be able to go out, look at your recruitment process, and attract and retain. And as Anne-Marie says, it's the retention piece. It's not shoving in a few, brown faces. It's retention, and then making them successful, and not psychologically traumatizing people. I mean, I can't speak for Anne-Marie. I know I have been through psychological trauma, some of the organizations I've worked in the past, because I was the first, maybe the last, and only Black person, especially of any kind of seniority. And it was horrendous. And like Anne-Marie, you had to have coping strategies, and that shouldn't be work. So absolutely, think about that.
Yeah.
I just had a point to add, actually, Barbara. Basically, I know there's a lot of leaders and CEOs who are passionate about diversity in the comms industry, but I think another issue is particularly when it comes down to the line manager level. So a lot of my counterparts, some of them are probably on this call, who are from a diverse background. When they're having discussions with their line manager about progression, there's no clear path for them, and it's kind of just like a vague conversation to be like, you're doing well, just carry on as you are, you're doing fine, you're doing good. But there's no clear conversations on, how can we get to that next stage, and I definitely know that, when I compare the conversations that some of my my peers have had with their line managers, you know, there's very, very frank conversations had to say, look, I need to be at this level in the next 2 years. How do I get there? But some of us are probably too afraid to have those direct conversations. And that's something that I've definitely struggled with in my career. I've never been able to kind of, you know, stand on my 2 feet and say, okay, look, where's my career actually going? You know, what's the next step for me? And I think line managers can do a lot more to help people like us, you know, to get to that next stage. And I don't think it should be something that they should expect us to figure out on our own. I think it needs to be a conversation that needs to be had at the senior level and works down to the line manager level to help people progress.
Absolutely, and I think this is the absolutely ideal time now to talk about PRISM. And PRISM is our mentoring program, which we've introduced in REEB, and it stands for PR, inclusion, support, and mentoring. And we want meaningful mentoring. Everything Emmanuel, Anne-Marie, and Sudha just said. I mean, Anne-Marie, I'm so glad that you found somebody to mentor and support you. A lot of us didn't get that, and this is why we've introduced PRISM. So if you want to sign up to be a mentor, absolutely go to, we have a page on our REEB page on the PRCA site. If you want mentoring, absolutely join up and join the cohort. There's no level to it. We absolutely understand, as Emmanuel has just said, we absolutely understand it's all levels. Senior people need that final leg up to the C-suite. 2 levels down, you need that leg up to director level. Everybody needs it. And, you know, there are lots of people in the industry, as Emmanuel said, who are advocates, who want to help, who are feeling a bit, you know, struck in terms of what can I do? This is absolutely one of the things you can do. So I deeply encourage you all to go and find out about PRISM on the PRCA website, sign up to mentor, sign up to be a mentee, and let's, you know, shake some of this out. Let's keep moving it forward.
Yeah, I just want to have a comment, Barbara, on what you said about the, you know, hiding your feelings and the coping strategy. And this is something that people, you know, underrepresented groups have constantly got to struggle with. It's the emotional labor, the emotional tax that you need to pay in order to be and succeed, or even just to survive in an organization. And organizations, you know, people have to be sensitive about it. So on what businesses can do, I think also a lot of agencies are just looking inwards and trying to change things. Perhaps they need to get a specialist in to help them on this journey, and then take it upon themselves at a stage when, you know, they figured out the entire journey, because most of them don't know how to do this. Most of us don't know how to do it. We're still figuring it out. So it's good to get in a specialist, and good to think about, you know, because an outsider in view is always better to understanding the culture, the structures, the processes. I think that internal, you know, working in that echo chamber about, okay, we want to make change, we want to be equitable, we want to be inclusive, but we're going to do it ourselves. I don't think that's working or going to work in the long term.
Yeah, I think also another underused resource is the exit interview. So either organizations don't do them, or they do them and there's not necessarily the really honest conversation about kind of why people kind of have left. So if there was a way to kind of structure that exit interview, maybe giving it to someone neutral to do, and then you can use that as data. I mean, it's useful for anyone really, as to what your organization needs to do to improve. So often it's things like, you know, I couldn't see any progression path, and you know, the organization will say, but you know, we've got lots of vacancies at senior levels. Well, why can't I have one of them then? You know, so people need to kind of look at the data that they've got, interrogate it, and think what they can do to improve, as opposed to going through the motions of an exit interview and then kind of filing it under exit interviews. Be a suggestion.
And I think to that point, Anne-Marie, this is where you have to have a real dollop of realism. I mean, leaders, you need to just be real with yourself, because maybe I'm just too cynical. I don't believe you can't understand. If you have a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of your Black and Asian employees leaving, and they're saying there's no career path, and you're saying, but I don't see why there's not making a connection. I think sometimes even if, you know, you need to admit it to yourself, be real and admit it to yourself. And also, I think it goes back to HR. And I'm not attacking HR, but I really do think that there's a role within, there's a movement within a movement. HR really needs to sort out and decide, is it advocate for people, or is it just, you know, a corporate mouthpiece? At some point they should be the same. I want to work for an organization where the organization does advocate for me, but we're not there yet. So they need to sort that side of it out. And also, when there's a lot of talk now about mental, well-being, about, as someone said, the emotional tax. Don't forget about, I think when people are planning that, when they're doing their mental aid, first aiders, you need to get a Black or Asian person involved in that, because racial trauma at work, it's psychological trauma, it's abuse virtually bordering on. Don't talk about mental well-being and saying you're interested in my mental well-being. When I come to talk to you about race or racism in the organization, you're like, sorry, not comfortable, not sure what to do with that, because you're just blocking, my lived experience. So I encourage everybody who has mental health first aiders, make sure there's people of color in that, because our experience, like yours in terms of psychologically, but there's just the extra secret source of racism that we have to deal with that needs to be, if you're going to look after us all, then you absolutely need to include that.
Just one final point I wanted to add is, obviously there's probably a wider PR exercise from industry bodies industry publications, I should say, like PR Week, Rulio, Provoke Media. They do the PR 30 under 30. And I remember as soon as I got into the industry, I used to look on that list to see if I could find a Black person. And it's only until this year I found, a few people. So Alex, who's actually on this call, Alex Kolawale from APCO, some of the Taylor Bennett Foundation alumni were on that list. And for me, it was a massive thing, because I always dreamed of being on that list as soon as I got into the industry. So for me to actually see some people that look like myself on that list, it was an amazing thing. And, my dream is that one day there can be a PR Week 30 under 30 for BAME professionals, Black, Asian, and ethnic minority professionals. There'll just be a specific list focused on us, because I think we need to showcase some of the people that are doing well, that can really motivate the young people coming into the industry. So, that's something that I would definitely be campaigning for. And, I'm not afraid to have those conversations at all.
Fantastic idea. What a fantastic idea.
And I do think, and we're speaking for myself, but maybe Anne-Marie, Huda and I maybe need the 50 under 50. Because I'm way past 30, love. I do pretend I'm 39, but we're way past 30. But we'll take it, whatever it is, we'll take it. So you wonder if there are any questions now?
Yeah, I just have one more the same point to make, Barbara, that for racism, how we measure racism or how organizations are trying to tackle racism. Usually it is the leadership teams and HR that define what the racism or the issues that are there in the organization. And that should never be the case. The people who are impacted by it or who are affected by it and who are living it daily are the people who should help in defining that racism, and then how to dismantle that. And I think that model, I don't think anyone is using that model at all at this point. You're on mute.
Whoopsie. It goes down to discomfort. It's something I always talk about on our board and wherever I can. Desire. Let's not forget we're talking about grown-ups. It's desire. Almost everything that we're talking about today can happen if people want it to happen. The question is, why don't they want it to happen? I think we know the answer. But a lot of it can happen if people want it to happen. But having said that, as Sudha asked me in the beginning of this session, I think there's a bit more of a will, not much more movement, but the will is there. So, should we take some questions?
Absolutely.
I think you can. I know there are lots of comments, but if somebody wants to shout out, or maybe we can read through comments.
I think it was about resources. Tila has loved the conversation. Any questions?
I can see one here about, can clients do more to challenge their agencies and vice versa?
Yeah, that's Heather. Yeah.
Everyone's free to this. I mean, I've got a point of view. What do you think, Emmanuel?
Well, how can we challenge agencies, basically? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Sorry, repeat it, Anne-Marie.
Can clients do more to challenge their agencies and vice versa?
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely think clients can do more. I think especially when it's coming to the new business element, sometimes ethnic candidates hold themselves back from actually participating in new business because they think that they've got nothing to add, or they're like myself, back in the day, I used to just talk myself out of it because I thought, you know what, if I go into this room, no one's really going to take on my viewpoint, so there's no point in me really going. And I kind of used to shy away from the new business aspect on the agency side because I thought that my views wouldn't really kind of resonate with the people in the room. And looking back, I think I made a mistake. I think I should have been in those conversations. I should have been at the table because I think I could have brought a different perspective. Just some of the experiences that I've been through could have, sparked a different conversation entirely. So I think I would really, advise agency leaders to really try to make sure that whenever they're going into pitches, to make sure that there's diversity at the table. There's people there that can really bring a different perspective. It's amazing going to private school, but how long can you talk about going to private school for? If you talk about that, one or two times, it gets a bit boring after a while. I wouldn't mind bringing up a conversation about Stormzy and seeing how that kind of rolls out, because that would be a different conversation that people are not really, expecting to have. So I think that's something that I would have loved to do, and I'm hoping that people can do that moving forward.
Yeah, can I, for over 20 years, I think large organizations, the big multinationals, have been working on supplier diversity. And I think the creative industries and the PR industry is what they've left for the last. But there is movement. I can see that clients want now, the teams who are coming in, and not just the young kid, not just the young exec who is like, switching on the laptop and, setting up the room, but they want people at different levels in that room who can reflect diversity. So I think, there is movement, but more needs to be done. They need to just sort of blacklist some agencies for a point in time to give that message that, there's not, that it's going to lose your business. I think that has to be there.
I think also, I spoke about it last week in terms of, I always talk to clients and agencies about sustainability and their operating model. Because if you look at who's in the talent pool is multicultural, it is diverse. Look at who's going to university, it's a diverse group of young people. Look at who's available, it's a diverse group of young people. And at some point, I also spoke about entrepreneurship, amongst diverse communities, Black, Asian and non-white communities. That's where the future big corporations is going to be. They're small now, but at some point they're going to be as big as any other organization. All organizations started from nothing, and they're going to be led by Black, Asian, non-white people. Your agency will not get that business if you're all white and you're all male. Remember, that's 29.5% of the population are male, white and able-bodied. It's a minority. If that's who's running your organization in perpetuity, then you will not get that business. And you will have some point have to start looking at your operating model, thinking, why aren't we winning these pitches? Why aren't we even being invited? What's happening? Why are we missing out? And we're laying it out, saying right now, it's not only a moral imperative. I don't like to use the sort of business imperative. So I think it's more a sustainability imperative. If you want to keep your organization going, then you really need to look at who's out there. So suppliers, talent, clients, the whole kit and caboodle, that needs to be included.
Hi, I've got a question, if I may. So, Anne-Marie, I was really interested to hear, what you were talking about when you were saying, when you worked at the bank and you had to change and blend in more in order to be appreciated. And I guess on the one hand, we're looking for diversity, but on the other hand, we're looking for people to fit in culturally. So my question is that, sorry, I haven't got my video on. So my question is that if we want to kind of support someone to develop their personal style, it may be the case that I've worked for different companies, so and I've just come into the PR space at the moment, but before that I've been in different companies, and they've been big corporates and big healthcare companies as well. But I've noticed that it's not just Black people or Asian people, but there are white people who might come across as being more aggressive in their style. So are we saying that it's wrong to challenge that, or to try and support them so that they can come across in a way that's a bit more collegiate and supportive. My view is that we should be doing things to help them with their personal development. We should embrace the diversity that person brings, whatever background they're from. But I don't think we should allow that to be an excuse to accept behaviours that perhaps are considered aggressive. What are your thoughts on that?
So I absolutely kind of understand and get that. I guess my kind of retort to that was actually aggression and anger is actually a kind of microaggression that's often given to kind of people of colour, just because they stand up for themselves or they say things that they are. So I know the difference between kind of being aggressive and assertive, and actually sometimes people, you know, the perception is that, you know, and actually it's a female thing as well. Sometimes if a female kind of speaks her mind, then she's aggressive. But on the broader point, my observation, having worked in large corporates all of my career, is that they do recruit people. So the person I'm thinking of particularly was actually a man. Actually, they recruited him because he was different. They were trying to change the organisation. They thought that he could bring kind of experiences into the organisation that they didn't actually have, and expertise. And over a period of time, it's quite interesting to observe it happening actually. Gradually, kind of corporates kind of grind you down, and actually they, rather than accepting kind of your difference and thinking about why they brought you into the organization in the first place, they just create someone that actually fits into that mold. So often you'll find, I mean, it's just my experience of big corporates, that either they will disappear after 3 years because they thought, actually I didn't join for this, or they will just stay and become a slightly different person. So I think if organizations are really serious about kind of having an inclusive culture where people feel free to be themselves, then we need to judge them by what they do and not what they say, as kind of James Baldwin would say. And actually sometimes it means that they need to kind of do things a little bit differently and kind of test things, and, you know, not be kind of afraid to fail at that. And sometimes that means kind of challenging people's own assumptions. So is she really aggressive? Is she really aggressive? What do I mean by aggressive? Actually, maybe it's a stylistic thing that isn't necessarily the same as my style. But I agree, bad behaviour should absolutely be called out.
Yeah, and I feel compelled to chime in there, because, you know, I cover this in some of the training that I do in terms of personal impact. Absolutely. When I say be your authentic self to work, it's a microaggression itself to presume that means I'm going to be aggressive because I'm Black and a woman. So, but let's park that. The idea is most people don't come to work to be rude, and they don't come to work to be disruptive, but they do come to work. If you're saying this is a culture that you can express yourself, if I am completely 100% direct, which I don't think anybody would say that I am not, doesn't equate to me being aggressive, but I am going to be direct. And I think if you're going to be inclusive, there needs to be a flex in the culture. So you need to say, okay, Barbara always gets straight to the point. Doesn't mean she's aggressive, but she comes straight to the point. You know where you are with her. If you flex and you are actually genuinely inclusive, no one will be offended by that. We're talking about, you know, people who are fragile, people who just want everybody to fit in the way that they work. You know, you have to say things the way that your line manager wants you to make them feel good. That's not the answer. So, you know, to your point, nobody, as Anne-Marie said, nobody sanctions bad behavior, but it's who is the arbiter of the bad behavior. You know, there's bad behaviors we'd all recognize, you know, swearing, maybe profanity, misogyny, whatever it is, but just being direct doesn't necessarily mean that you're aggressive, and shouldn't really hold you back, but it does.
Yeah, this
has that answered your question?
Sorry, Ken.
Yeah, no, it has answered my question. I think it's a more complex phenomenon, you know, in terms of human behaviour, and what, as you say, what one person considers acceptable versus another person. But I do think, you know, what you're saying resonates, and I accept that, you know, you don't want everyone to be a mould of the same person, because that's not what diversity is about. But I equally think that there has to be a way in which people interact with each other, and I think you can be direct and to the point and get your point across without offending people. And I think that that's where the complex balance and the little dance sometimes happens. And is that wrong? Is that going to change? I don't know.
So let me give you a real life example that I've got. Let's just come to me actually as we've been talking. So I two of my best friends actually used to work for me. They're kind of part of my team now. And when they were part of my team. And when they heard that I was going to be their boss, this is going back probably about 15 years now, someone said to them, "She looks scary." I'm like what? Why do I look scary? And they've told me this subsequently. But when they actually came to work for me, they actually said that I was probably one of the best bosses that they've ever had, and I'm one of their kind of best friends. And so why did someone who didn't know me think that I was scary? Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So they kind of looked at me and they thought, actually, she looks scary. I'm not quite sure.
It makes sense. You don't look scary, but
I'd just like to add to that this, often happens with marginalized groups and underrepresented groups and protected characteristics, where you have perceptions about, already in your brain, that this is the way they're going to behave. You have an expectation that they're going to behave like this, and that behavior is not going to fit with me. That is the broader culture generally across, not just in the PR industry, but across businesses. And that is why it becomes difficult to accept that, that person, because they're just not like you, that they are, either aggressive or being too difficult or whatever. And we see this all the time across businesses where there's this conversation about we just want to make everybody, behave respectfully, but it is not about everybody. It is about that person of color. It is about that Black woman, or it is about the Asian woman. Most of the time it is like that. And it could be about the person with disability or the person, queer person of color. It could be about those people. And most of it overwhelmingly is like that. And sometimes it may be that it is not so.
And can I add to that, and to your point also, Sonal, I don't think this is complex. I think lots of people hide behind complexity to not really call it as it is. It's not really that complex. If you have decided what respect looks like, then obviously you're going to find 99% of people disrespectful because you've just defined what you think respect looks like, rather than going back and appreciating that respect comes in very many different forms. Doesn't mean that person's being disrespectful, and you can choose. Same as when there'll be people, I've worked in offices where I've been the only Black person, and a white person can have a bad day. They've thrown things across the room, they've effed and blind, they broke up with their boyfriend. Everyone's like, "Oh, poor Sally, she had a bad day." I can't do that. I know I can't do that. People are choosing to say, "Oh, well, she's having a bad day, send her home, it's not great." Barbara, don't even think about trying to do that, in any way, shape or form. So that's a choice. So I think it's really not that complex. Human behavior is complex, but the choices you make around it. And I just wanted to add also, is that you're saying, where are the meeting points? Where is the common denominator? Generally, it's with expectations in a role. Roles have a level of expectations. I bet you that person you're finding difficult is actually meeting the expectations. As Anne-Marie said, she was getting brilliant, scores. They're meeting the expectations, but just not in the way that you think they should. It's, policing Black people's bodies, policing able bodies, and disabled people's bodies, policing people's sexuality. It's all down to policers, and they are all choices.
I don't think Sonal expected so many different points of views.
No, I think it's really healthy discussion, and I could talk on this for a lot longer because I've got other views on this. And I guess the people I'm thinking about, which is interesting, are not Black people. The people I'm thinking about where this has happened are white people, and they're white males, and they're white senior males, but to your point earlier, Emmanuel, then they're not up in the C-suite area, but and it's how they're coming across. And there are cultural differences. When I worked at GSK, there were Italians, and of course they come across differently, and everyone has their own style and way of being. The people I'm thinking about aren't Black, but it's a lovely discussion. I could talk for a lot longer, but
no, it is a lovely discussion. I remember being in a room where the senior PR person in the room threatened to throw his PA out the window, and we were kind of quite high up at the time because she had made the most simple mistakes, and I was really quite surprised, and no one batted an eyelid. No one batted an eyelid. And I kind of had to take her to one side and just check that she was okay. But these are the cultural behaviours that are allowed to thrive in some environments until someone calls them out. And
it's really interesting because as a black man, you know, I'm 6'2". I go to the gym. I'm quite well built, and it's like I'm always second guessing. If I lose my temper today, or if I push back too hard, what's going to be the repercussions for me? Because as Anne-Marie said, you know, I've been in places where people have avoided getting in the lift with me because I'm too massive or something, and I'm just like, it sounds so silly, but this is real life. Things like this actually do happen. You know, people are scared to get into the lift with a massive black guy who's 6'2", who goes to the gym, he's well built, he's going to crush me. But I'm probably one of the nicest guys that you're ever going to work with. I'm very kind, I'm very caring, but some people see me and they're like, oh my God, you're huge. That's the first thing that everyone sees me. Like whenever I join an agency, I walk into the room, oh my God, he's massive. And it's like, okay, I'm massive, but I'm much more than that, you know? And I think that's these sorts of little microaggressions that people need to just kind of get over.
Yeah, one of the things I'm doing actually is, and maybe we can come back and talk about it later on in the year, is I've just generously be given a grant by CIPR to do something I'm quite passionate about, and that's kind of research people's lived experiences within the workplace so that we can put in place some toolkits. So one is if you're kind of hyper visible kind of physically, but not necessarily in terms of talent. So that's one. And then the other thing is, as an organization, how can I stop this like revolving door of talent coming in and out? So I'm quite excited about kind of starting that and getting that going, and maybe we can come back and talk about it in October when it's done.
Super. Any last questions? Sonal, thank you for that question. That we got to debate on such an important issue because of that question. No, I think that's it. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you very much, Barbara and Marie, Emmanuel, for being here and for supporting this conversation. We've had a lovely conversation, and we'll catch up again sometime very soon. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sudha.
Thank you.
Bye.